how significant is Christianity to the American way of life? There was a time where when politics was somewhat intertwined with Christianity. But has that changed over time, or was it ever even really true? Eli Slack is here, and he will lead us in explaining the idea of civil religion and what that means today.
Thank you, Jimmy. So in 1954, following a sermon by Reverend George Daugherty, Dwight Eisenhower signed congressional legislation to add the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance. The stated purpose of the change was to distinguish the Christian democracy of the United States from the atheist communism of the USSR. In his sermon, Daugherty referred to atheists as spiritual parasites and called atheist Americans a contradiction in terms. But today, 21% of Americans claim no religion at all. That comes out to 7 million people in the United States who are, including the four of us, the crew, everybody at the nonprofits and at the ACA, who don't fall under any God. So to give you an example of how much 21% is, the air on Earth is only about 21% oxygen. The rest is mostly nitrogen. So with Christian nationalism spreading in the US, it seems that this first act of civil religion by Eisenhower just paved the way. This story is from Religion News Service by Beau Underwood and Brian Kaylor on June 25th, 2024.
Excellent. So I want to hearken back to this idea of civil religion. And that basically says that, at least in American society, that the way the government operates is by its own ritual, its own hierarchies, its own properties that are also common in religion. And I want to ask you, Eli, are American politics and Christianity really all that different? They both have their own rules, authoritative hierarchies. How, if at all, do these ideologies fit together?
You know, I was thinking about this earlier, and I thought you make a good point. Having the hierarchies, having the rules, and I think it's telling a little bit to the origin of either Christian or either religion or government, or both of those things. Whichever one came first, it seems like obviously government to govern, like the idea is control of some sort, and having so much similarity between the two things, you would think, looking at it on the surface, that perhaps the intent is similar, and you start looking into that and perhaps the way that it is. But the curious thing here is that Daugherty in his sermon referred to basically saying that Christianity is fundamental to the American way of life, that like if you deny the Christian God, you deny the American ideal. And I think that seems a little bit not like, that doesn't seem true to me, because I think Christianity teaches get rid of your belongings, live in service to this invisible entity that requires you to follow these really specific, like really weird rules, or, in order to get this reward, or, you'll torture forever if you don't. And that doesn't sound like, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to me. That sounds like ass servitude and like the pursuit of death. So it doesn't really, ring true to me that Christianity and the American ideal of life are one and the same, or intertwined.
Yeah. So I think maybe the lessons of each are different, but maybe some of the methodology, maybe how it's carried out, might have some similarities. Rob, do you think that this kind of approach, this ideology, could be harmful to non-Christians? And if you have any thoughts on what Eli just said, please feel free.
Yeah, so America was largely founded by people fleeing religious persecution in the first place, so that they could practice their religions in the way that they wanted to. And that doesn't necessarily play so nice with the framers, who have things like freedom of religion, because yes, they wanted to be able to practice there. So then the entity that is America, which is difficult to talk about in many ways anyway, because we have things like the Federalist Papers and what other people wanted. We had a whole war about what America should be. So the idea of what is America is something that continues to be in question, when in many ways it's not even supposed to be, because we have the Constitution, we have the Declaration of Independence, it has been amended, we have ways of determining what is America. However, because we know that it can change, there is people who constantly want to insert religiosity specifically into it, even though the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution explicitly do not allow it to happen. Or they say things like there need to be separation of church and state. So what seems to happen to me is a constant redefining of what America is, with a complete disregard of what America was, because it should always have been a way. So it ends up feeling more like picking and choosing in a lot of ways, because it's just more cherry picking of, this is the part of the Constitution that gives me the thing I want, and this is the part of the Declaration of Independence that doesn't give me the thing I want, thus I shall disregard them.
Yeah, and Kelly, so both Eli and Rob point to the ambiguities of what it means to be American, right? So we have the Christian foundations of our country, but the very different things that we kind of adhere to as Americans, from what Eli was saying. And Rob makes a very good point. You know, what does it mean to be American? I think that right now we might be in a redefining point. You know, it's very contentious in our country. But this article is based on a speech that was given in the 1950s, 1954. So, Kelly, how has the relationship between Christianity and non-religious Americans changed since this speech?
As Eli mentioned, there has been a large movement away from the church since that happened, a very large movement. In the article, they mentioned 21%, which I'm not sure where they get that number. That isn't true. It's actually 28%. And it's a really, and I try to say this a lot because I think it's a really, really important point. This 28% are not atheists and agnostics. They're people who are unaffiliated with a church. So you have to lump in a bunch of people who are still religious, but they don't go to church. My siblings are like that. They still believe in God, and they may go to church at Christmas. They may go to church on Easter, but that's it. You know, they're not going every Sunday, and they might not even go to the same church. They might just go to the church that one of their friends goes to for Christmas. So you got to remember that those people are lumped in there too. And also, does anybody know a Wiccan? Because I don't, and if you do know a Wiccan, do you think that Wiccan would say they belong to a church? So there's another group of religious people that are going to say they're not affiliated with the church. But that is a large group of people that are no longer as religious as people once were in this country, like when the speech was made. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big difference. That's a huge difference. And in the long run, I think we are winning. I hate to say winning, but I think that reason is getting through to people. We're starting to become a little smarter in the United States. There's still some anchors to really bad religion, but I think we're starting to shed those and cut those anchor lines as well. Hopefully, anyway.
Absolutely. I think there is definitely a dwindling down of religious influence in politics across the board, but maybe not where the political parties are split, right? So I think that there's more of an influence in one party than there is across the whole government. You know, and I think that we've made leaps and bounds in that respect. But I do think that when it comes to being religious in this country, it means something different than it did in 1954, right? I think that when people used to talk about, well, we're religious, this country is religious, they meant something very specific, Christian. And Kelly, to your point, what about all the people that are unaccounted for? And what about all the people that are protected by the same rules that Christians are? And so, Eli, I want to ask you, do these Christian politicians not understand the Establishment Clause, or do they just not care, and are they just trying to score political points?
At first, you want to, it seems like they don't understand, right? You want to kind of lean that way, but then you realize they're not uneducated people. They understand the Establishment Clause. I think the politicians, I think you're right. I think they're just trying to score points, and they know certain things aren't going to fly. Just like some other things we're going to talk about this week, they know certain things aren't going to fly, but they're going to try it anyway just to score the support later on. But what I think is interesting is that the not the politicians, but the constituents, the citizens, the Christians, they think is one of two things. Either they'll say like Christianity isn't a religion, it's a relationship with God or a relationship with Christ, right? So they think like, well, the other things, those are religions because those are just beliefs, but mine is true, so it's not a religion, so it doesn't have to follow the same rules. It's just like, it's just special pleading.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem that anybody can even agree on it, right? These people all call themselves maybe Christians, and they even disagree. We've talked about before the many different sects that exist in religion. Rob, does religion have any use in society?
That depends on what you mean. So yes, it's self-serving for religion, and for society itself, no. At least I don't think so. I think societies can exist without religion. A lot of people will then just say something like, but then you just believe in atheism as your religion, which is nonsensical and not what I want to talk about. There is a thing where humans are extremely attached to tradition and ritual and ceremony. These are very important even to me as an atheist. And religion in some ways plays on that, but is also necessitates it. So religion has a place because it has carved out a place such that it's self-serving, which is why, just slight thing, what really got me about specifically this article is how, like, I didn't know this until this article, but they have Lincoln Sunday, where this is a church where presidents go to commemorate Lincoln, and it's part of the history of America and the tradition, right? Even if it's not a religious thing explicitly, it's tradition to go here. It's like we pardon a turkey every year, right? So it's tradition for the presidents to go to this place. So then Daugherty, the guy giving the sermon, the pastor at the time, uses his position and influence to explicitly give this sermon at that time, again, for constituents to be able to push their power and their agenda in what they're specifically trying to achieve. So is there a use for religion in so much as how religion has perpetuated itself, but just for society to function? Clearly not. I am not religious, and I do good things. Sure. So I don't need it.
Well, I think that your idea of religion penetrating society is exactly what, and in reference to this article, talking about Robert Bellah, the sociologist, Robert Bellah's idea of civil religion, that humans are just naturally inclined to take aspects of the things they already know. So in designing a government, they already know these ritualistic and hierarchical things from their religion. And just like Lincoln Sunday, it's just something you do, right? Just like in political campaigning, appealing to religious masses is just something that politicians do. But I think it's resulted, even lately, especially lately, in a rise of Christian nationalism. And I want to ask you, Kelly, is Christian nationalism now a permanent problem for the United States based on the way that we continuously adopt these aspects?
I think one of the most salient points of this article was when one of the authors said that any movement to bring religion back into the government that isn't nationalist Christian right now will no longer work. And that is how much nationalist Christianity has poisoned the well of right-wing politics at this point in time, that they cannot even get a coherent movement to bring religion into the government without going through that pathway. And that's pretty bad. That's really, really bad. And I think it's really important to remember that not all Christians are nationalist Christians. And I'm going to call them nationalist Christians because they're putting the country before their religion. And you can shorten it down to Nat-Cs. And I think that's a great thing we can call them. But I think, like I said, though, I think it's important to remember that not all Christians are Nat-Cs, and that we do have allies on the other side of the fence to fight back against these people. And we shouldn't turn our back on some of the more liberal Christians, because we do need them as allies in this fight.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that it's really telling that people can have different definitions for maybe what religion means in society, what Christianity means in society, but also to what loyalty to one's country means. And I think this is one of these definitions that gets maybe watered down or misinterpreted. And Eli, I wanted to ask you, is there really anything wrong with being loyal to your country? Is it perhaps the term loyalty that is confusing, more so confusing than this idea of nationalism or religion and government, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, I get where you're going. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. No, necessarily. I mean, I'm a veteran. I joined the military as soon as I could out of high school. I think what's confusing the issue isn't the word loyalty. I think it's the word country, because I think what's happening, if I think we could benefit from recontextualizing the word patriotism, for example, to not be about like, oorah, 4th of July, America, Independence Day, 1776, but be more like, I care about the people that live in my country, the people that I have to survive with and I have to work with in order to survive myself and promote well-being for myself and others. If we could start looking at loyalty to one's country in a context like that, rather than, not to, say anything against it at all, but like, other than just things like joining the military or doing public service, caring about your fellow citizen or like just other people around you, loyalty in that manner, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I just think the issue gets confused.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think just real quick, I think a lot of Americans confuse patriotism with jingoism, and that's a big problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been reading this book called A Brilliant Solution. And I bring this up, Rob, because you talked about the foundation of this country earlier, but it's a book that talks about the Constitutional Convention and the writing of the Constitution after the failure of the Articles of Confederation. And what they talk about really is that these people went through great lengths to agree on what loyalty to your country meant, even when they had very different views, and they worked together to make sure they did not include Christian principles, because many of these people came from different Christian backgrounds. They had advice from different Christian faiths. They had members of Baptists or Presbyterians, etc. Asking them, hey, maybe we shouldn't include religion, right? In the new government. So,
you got to remember too that in England there was a lot of back and forth between the Catholics and the Protestants, and people were always getting arrested.
Well, they were trying
in jail, tortured, even burned because they were a Catholic or a Protestant.
And they wanted to stave off this idea that a large, powerful church could come in and swallow up all the small ones, and everybody should live free of that threat. Rob, how do we get to this point from that point?
Say that again, I'm not sure what you mean.
So how do we get to this point where we have excellent rhetoricians in pastors, for example,
right,
using their dogma to infect society, if you will, when we come from this long history of the Establishment Clause and the formation of a government, trying to avoid that?
I normally don't like sounding so like hippie fuzzy, but so
that's all right. Kelly's with us.
I work with kids, and one of the things that I do with kids is I teach my staff to check in with kids, be interested in them, talk with them. If they want to talk about a thing, they're interested in it. And I see other centers that are similar to ours. They do something called a check-in board, where each staff member has a check-in with a certain number of kids per day. And so my boss has to come to me, because that's my job, is literally to make sure the culture is going good. And they're like, what do you think of that, Rob? And I go, I will not do it. And they go, why not? And I go, and this is the specific phrase I use, I refuse to mechanize compassion. If they can't do it, if they can't be compassionate, then this isn't the job for them. And that's not a bad thing. But I don't need people who I need to force to be compassionate. How do we get from there to here? We need people to actually care about each other and the world they live in beyond, frankly, the fictitious beliefs that they have, and that allows them to push their political agenda such that it forces other people into it. And that's why that's why pastors end up being where they are, right? Because they're very convincing, but they're convincing to push their religion. We need people to actually talk to each other. It's a very famous quote. I don't know who said it. You will know it, which is, I disagree with you, sir, but I will fight to the death for your right to say it. And that does not exist anymore, because they will fight to the death to kill you so you can't say what you want to say.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to Kelly's point earlier that he brought up, where we are past the point of being able to reconcile this political divide that we experience, especially using religion, right? I think that religion is not a means now to effectively communicate with each other. So, Kelly, do you have any ideas on how we move past this, knowing that we have a section, a large portion of this society that still adheres to extremist Christian views and others that don't, although they may be Christians? How do we bridge this divide? Any thoughts on that?
I think we're already in a cold civil war. I mean, there's talk about it. I mean, we're there. That information is going back and forth on both sides. So how do we stop that? How do we reconcile all that? I'm absolutely not positive. And I think we can all agree it's not most people who feel this way. It's extremists on both ends, probably more on one side than the other. But let's face it, it's extremists. And how do you reach these people? These are the people that are the hardest to reach to begin with. So I'm not sure. I think the best thing for us to do is remember that they are extremists. They are a smaller part of our society, and that we can get past this without them. So that if we can just isolate those people, let them see understand how ridiculous some of their views are. And I think that's one of the best ways to fight back, is just to show them the absurdity, take it to the absurd and show them how silly their stuff is. And that to me is probably the best way to fight back, but I know there's other ways.
I think these conversations are ways that we do that. This show and shows like it. Before we wrap up, though, Eli, I want to ask you, you mentioned your military career, but in your military career, you must have been placed with people who were so different from yourself. How did you relate to them?
Well, when you get in a situation like that, you relate through, the training and the experiences that you share with each other. But what you really do is you just kind of learn. Like, I had roommates. I had a roommate that was from a French-speaking country in Africa. He was born there, and that was a culture that I had never been exposed to before. And like, all I could do was like learn. And he ended up being one of my good friends. So, I mean, yeah, all you can really do is like just show tolerance and care about each other. Kind of like, Rob and I we've all said already, just caring about people you live with. Make patriotism cool again.
Well, if I could say, wow.
Say that again, Rob?
So, but like, that's the thing though, is I agree. What's the alternative? If we can't like be around each other and just like learn, what is the alternative? The alternative is violence, and that's not cool. So either we're going to learn how to be cool with each other or we ain't. So I don't want to be the person who starts the ain't. So let's be cool and actually learn and talk to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think what we've really uncovered tonight in this conversation is the fact that there is a lack of a common experience, isn't there? I think that there are people that are opposed to each other, and we really don't know how similar we actually might be. And we're living life as Americans differently. And it just doesn't need to be that way. These echo chambers are not serving our society well. Go ahead, Kelly.
I'm about to say, I don't know that we're living different. We're not, that we are actually living differently. We're all living in the same place. We just think we're living differently, right?
Sure. And I think that's a great point. And thank you for that clarification. Right. We don't realize that we do have these rituals. We do have these hierarchies, these common experiences that bind us. And people worked very hard to get us there. People have been working really hard to keep us one for a long time. And so while we look for ways to do that, and we may not have the answers, I encourage our viewers to consider that and maybe look for ways on their own. And if you want to find the way that we're going to try and do that, you can click the link below and access more Nonprofits content.